If I could just sort of take one quick moment, you really don't need an introduction of Kamala Harris in terms of her public life. Some of you may know that obviously she was the Attorney General of the great state of California. You may know that she was the District Attorney for San Francisco. But if I could just sort of give a personal story for a second, I first met Senator Harris when I somehow smuggled my way into the first Obama state dinner. I did not actually crash the party because my wife was 8 months pregnant, although we would have had we could have. And I found myself, I was an elected official at the time, and as I say, it was the only time that racial stereotyping was accepted. It was to get into that state dinner. And there weren't that many Indian American electeds. And I found myself at a table, Monica and I, with then District Attorney Harris, about to run for Attorney General, and instead of bringing a donor she was with her sister. And I remember my wife saying, well, that seems like a really nice woman. You know, the two of them were so amazing. They, of course, looked great. They knew everybody in the room. And I thought, okay, well, that's a signal. And then, of course, she won this tremendous race to become the Attorney General of the state of California, which is amazing. And then I ran into you probably don't even remember, at LaGuardia. And we were they let me into the business class lounge, and I had my 2-year-old then with me, and the first thing you did was you said, she just came right into your lap, and you took some photos with her, and we still have these photos that were on my old BlackBerry phone, because that's the kind of person she is, it was very seamless with that. And then, of course, her niece, Mina Harris, who I think is probably as well known in this room as your Miss English champ. Exactly, there we go. I first met them at the Democratic Convention in 2008, and I thought, what a dacey thing to do to make your niece work for free for you. Because you're not only wicked, smart, and talented, you're free. And I said, this is our kind of woman. So without further ado, I would just say her story is inspirational. We've said it 100 times. You have been, your ears hopefully were burning because you were referenced many times today. Needless to say, her potential for not only this community, for this country, for this world is limitless. We have many great things to come. I think you have many people in this room who wish you nothing but the best. We're graced by your presence, so please, without further ado, Senator Kamala Harris.
All of those occasions I remember, and each time, and we all know Raj, but each time you always make sure that that you are present at all of these places and moments so that you can speak the voice of many who cannot otherwise be there. And I applaud you for your leadership consistently, and including what you've done to bring us all together this whole day, and for me this afternoon. He got in touch with me right away and said, this is happening, it's the first ever, you must be here, please, please come. And of course I couldn't deny him that request, because this is such an exciting moment. And I'm looking around this room, look at how we've packed this room. This is extraordinary. This is really, really just extraordinary. So I'm going to just get into this conversation because there are a lot of very important people here and leaders here, and there's a lot to discuss. And I know there's been a long and good and robust conversation throughout the day. But I'm truly grateful to be at this Impact Summit because, of course, impact is what we must do. So I'll give you guys some sense of my background. You may have some sense of it, but everything about my background has to do with who I am today. Everything about it. As many of you may know, or you do know, my mother, of course, was born in India. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was one of the original freedom fighters in India. And my mother was his eldest child, his daughter, but the eldest child. And I am the eldest granddaughter. And as you know, in India, the birth order has a lot to do with many things. And also my grandfather was just one of those kind of people that made all of us feel that we were his special and only one. And so he convinced me I was his favorite grandchild, as he did all of his grandchildren. But we used to go back, first of all, my grandfather was very progressive, and as was my grandmother. And when my mother graduated college in Delhi, she wanted to go to what was considered to be one of the best universities in the world to study science, endocrinology. And that happened to be University of California, Berkeley. And my grandfather said to my mother, who was then 19 at the time, and this is in the late 1950s, my grandfather said to my mother, you want to go and you want to study at one of the best universities? I encourage you to go, you'll go. And he put my mother on a plane at 19 years of age to travel from India to Berkeley, California to pursue her studies in her PhD in endocrinology at Berkeley. And having grown up in the family and in the environment that my mother did, she got to Berkeley, and it was the 1959, and then as she was pursuing her studies through the early 60s, of course, she was automatically, having had this father who fought for freedom and independence of India, she automatically was attracted to the civil rights movement. And so there is where she went. And we have photographs of my mother in her saris and in all of manner of dress, doing the work, as my sister Maya and I joke, of being with all of these adults who surrounded us in our childhood, who spent full time marching and shouting for this thing called justice. So my mother, of course, was automatically attracted to the civil rights movement. Now, of course, she was supposed to go to Berkeley, get her PhD, and then go back home for a good arranged marriage. But instead, she met my father and had a love marriage, and here I am. But I will tell you, like many of us, we grew up going back to India every 2 years at least. And some of my earliest memories of any conversation that involved me about politics were those conversations that my grandfather had with his buddies on his morning walk every morning in Besant Nagar, in what was then Madras and is now Chennai. Because we would go back every 2 years, and me being the eldest and his so-called favorite, because I thought I was, he would take me on the walks in the morning. By this time, he had retired, with his buddies as they would take their morning ritual walk. And these were all of the fellows who together had been the leaders in this movement. In fact, my grandfather retired at what is essentially an undersecretary of state in India. And so there I would be, this young girl, holding my grandfather's hand, walking with them as they would debate and discuss with incredible passion the importance of a democracy. They would debate and they would discuss the importance of having a government that represents the people, all people. They would talk about the importance of eliminating corruption and making sure that every voice had equal weight and equal authority and dignity. And as I reflect on those moments, I know that those were the earliest moments that I formed my perspective and philosophy about what a democracy should and can be. And of course, as you know, then I went on to go to school, and I went to Howard University here in Washington, D.C. At a young age, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I went to law school, and right out of law school, I joined the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. That was once led by Earl Warren. And I went on to be a prosecutor. I personally prosecuted everything, including homicide cases. And then I ran for District Attorney of San Francisco. I challenged an incumbent. He comes from an old political family in San Francisco. He was in his second term. His nickname happens to be KO because he was known as a boxer who knocked people out. I thought that we could do the job much better than what he had been doing. I thought we needed to take seriously cases like domestic violence cases and child sexual assault cases. I thought we should take on fraud and things of that nature. And so I decided I would run against him. And like many of you in this room, especially those who are pursuing elected office or may think of pursuing elected office, at the time in 2002 when I decided to run against him, I was told what many of you may have been told or will be told. I was told, well, nobody like you has done this before. Well, maybe it's not your time. Maybe they're not ready for you. It'll be a lot of hard work, as though we were going to run away from hard work. These are the things I was told. And I didn't listen. And part of why I'm here today is to say, and don't you listen. I like to say, I eat no for breakfast. I eat no for breakfast. those early days of this campaign. So there I was, and I sat in that room with I was waiting for my consultant to come back with the first polling numbers. And then he came back and he gave me the first polling numbers. I was very excited, and I looked at the piece of paper, and there we were. We started the election at a very healthy 6 points in the polls. That's 6 out of 100. And I knew, however, I knew if we could make it to 12, we could win. And when we made it to 12, I knew we would win. And we did. And we did. And I became the first woman, and the first woman of color, or first person of color to be district attorney of any county in the state of California, and one of the first to be of Indian origin of any county in the country. Similarly, so after 2 terms, I was reelected as district attorney. I decided, the things that we're doing, taking on issues like criminal justice reform, we created an innovative criminal justice initiative called Back on Track, focused on first-time offenders and getting them into jobs and counseling to reduce their likelihood to reoffend. I decided, let's take this show on the road. Let's do this statewide. We can have an impact with a much larger group of people. So I decided to run for Attorney General of California. California is now the 5th largest economy in the world, has over 40 million people. And I decided that I was going to run to be the top cop then of the biggest state in this country. And you can imagine what I was told. You, a woman, there's never been a woman, a person of color, there's never been a person of color, who is from San Francisco and personally against the death penalty, wants to be the top cop of the biggest state in the country. It can never be done, they said. And of course, again, I didn't listen. I didn't listen. And what we did with our politics during that first race for district attorney and re-elect is the same thing that we did with our race for attorney general. And it is, again, what I referenced in terms of what I saw growing up. What we did is we built, and this is always important about the way we do our politics, and there is reason that we do it this way. We built a coalition. We built a coalition of people who seemingly have nothing in common, but have everything in common. And we brought people together, understanding that we have unique experiences that have taught us from the earliest stages of our lives that the vast majority of us, no matter where we were born, no matter what God we worship, no matter what language is being spoken at home, the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And that's how we did the politics of that race and my Senate race, and all of that brings me to be here today. So I want to talk about the issues that I think we're facing now from that perspective. I think of it, I was trying to remember what were some of the slogans when my grandfather was fighting for India's independence, because I am sure that some of those apply to what is going on with today's world. And one of them that I now remembered, but I had to look it up, was a national motto at the time, and I think it's still today, which is truth alone triumphs. Truth alone triumphs. So let's think about where we are today. We as leaders in the United States of America, through the lens of the countries of our origin, and thinking of it through the lens of what we must do and what we want to do and what we will do to provide a bright future for this country that we love. So I think of it this moment in time, and I think it is truly an inflection moment in the history of our country. I do think of this moment in time as being a moment in time that is similar to that moment in time when my parents met when they were active in the civil rights movement. I think of this as being a moment in time where we as Americans are being required to look in a mirror and answer a question. That question being, who are we? And I believe the answer is a good one. Imperfect though we may be, I believe we are a great country. I believe we are a great country. And part of what makes us who we are is that this is a country that was founded on certain ideals. Ideals that were present when we wrote the Constitution of the United States and all of its amendments. Ideals that were present in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. The ideals that were behind those words that were spoken in 1776 which is that we are all equals and should be treated that way. And I believe this is a moment in time that is requiring us to fight for those ideals. My husband and I, we have 2 children. One, Ella, graduated high school last year. Before she graduated, she asked me to come to speak to her senior class, and they were all gathered in the library of the high school. And one of the first questions, a student raised her hand and asked, "What are we going to do about a divided America?" And that question broke my heart. Here it is, these kids should be coming out with dreams about what they can be and the possibilities of who they are and what we can be and what they can create. And she asked, what are we going to do about a divided America? And I looked at her and I told her what I truly believe. I said, you know what, I reject the premise. I do not believe we are divided. Even in the face of powerful voices that are sowing hate and division in our country, I know it to be true and believe we have so much more in common than what separates us. And I went on to say, I know it because of all of my personal and professional experiences. I know it to be true based on what I call the middle of the night awakening moment, the 3 o'clock in the morning thought. Some people call it the witching hour. That moment in the middle of the night where you wake up startled, just jarred awake, sometimes in a cold sweat, with that thought that has been weighing on you. Well, for the vast majority of Americans, when we wake up with that thought at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is never through the lens of the party with which we're registered to vote. It is never through the lens of some demographic a pollster put us in. And for the vast majority of Americans, when waking up with that thought has to do with one of just a very few things. Our personal health, the health of our children, our parents. Can I get a job, keep a job, pay the bills by the end of the month, retire with dignity? For so many of our students, can I pay off those student loans? For the vast majority of us, we have so much more in common than what separates us. And in this moment in time, when there are those that are trying to sow hate and division, we have to hold on to that knowledge as we fight for our ideals. And we must be honest and also recognize that this is also a moment when there are a lot of people in this country who are extremely cynical and distrustful of their government and its leaders and its institutions. Distrustful. And let's remember something about a relationship of trust. A relationship of trust by nature is a reciprocal relationship. You give and you receive it. And one of the most important ingredients in a relationship of trust is truth. But there's a funny thing about truth. When we speak truth, it often makes people quite uncomfortable. And so for those of us seeking office, there is an incentive that we will leave the room. Oh, they are applauding and clapping, and aren't we lovely, and they're lovely. And everyone feels lovely as we walk away. Speaking truth does not always accomplish that goal. But here's the other thing about speaking truth. Yes, people may walk away from that conversation thinking, I didn't particularly like what I had to hear. But they will also walk away from that conversation respecting that it was an honest conversation. So for those of us who are leaders, I believe it is imperative, and in particular at this moment in time. Yes, we will look to what our grandfathers talked about in terms of what needed to happen, in terms of truth alone triumphs. And we will look to the present to know it is imperative that to be a leader right now means that we speak truth. So then you're looking at me and saying, okay, Kamala, what are some of the truths that you're thinking about? Well, I'll tell you. We must speak truth. Let's speak truth. Racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-Muslim sentiment is real in this country. Let's speak truth so we can deal with it. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth that in this country today, most middle-class families are running harder than ever before Gas prices are going up. Housing prices are going up, where there is even available affordable housing. But wages are not. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. This country was founded by immigrants. Unless you are Native American, or your ancestors were kidnapped and brought over on a slave ship, your people are immigrants. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. That ripping children from the arms of their parents is not border security. Let's speak truth. That is not a value. That is a family value. Let's speak truth. And let's speak truth that we have more in common than what separates us. So let's look at this also knowing that in speaking truth, the current fight must also be thought of as a collective fight. Meaning, again, not only do we have more in common than what separates us, but that we're all in this together, and that anyone's fight for freedom and equality is everyone's fight for freedom and equality. And so let's think about some of the issues that I think highlight the fact that the current challenges we have are a challenge for us as a collective. Let's look at what you all have probably heard. The White House Chief of Staff said immigrants can't, quote, easily assimilate into the United States, into our modern society. Cannot easily assimilate into the United States, into our modern society. And let's understand, he is a descendant of immigrants, okay? So when an administration rescinds DACA and TPS, systematically attempting to purge our nation of immigrants, that is a fact that should disturb anybody who is an immigrant or not, who comes from a family of immigrants or not, whether their descendants are from Ireland or India. It's a collective fight, and it's a collective issue. And let's recognize that. Let's recognize that when leaders sow hate and division, it is not a coincidence that hate crimes increase. Let's understand how that impacts all of us. Crimes against South Asians in America right now have increased by 45% since the election. And I will tell you, having been the Attorney General of California, where I publish the hate crime report every year for the largest state in this country, it still remains true that the #1 target of hate crime in America are African Americans. This is a collective issue, which we must all join in fighting against. Let's look at the issue about when we have an administration that is rolling back protections against discrimination in housing, as another example, that it is all up to all of us to fight, understanding this is a collective fight, fighting against discrimination. For example, look at the statistic that tells us 1 in 5 Indian Americans have experienced discrimination in workplace and in their lives, including in housing. Let's understand the collective fight on that issue when we also think about women, when we think about other communities of color, when we think about the LGBT community, and think about all of those who have known discrimination and still experience it, and how it impacts their daily lives. And then thinking of the fight as being a collective fight, where we're all in it together. Because when I think back to how I got to where I am, and I think about my mother as a young woman marching and shouting for justice before she got married, when she was just a young woman who believed in all possibilities. And I've looked at some of the photographs of her during that time, and it's an amazing sight to see. There were people of every walk of life, every color, every age who were part of that incredible movement. And I think history is going to show this moment in time is just a more current version of what was going on then. And so I'll close my comments by saying this. You know, I think it's interesting that when some people, when they see everyone, marching and shouting, as has been happening over the last, several months, Some people say that that might invite a question about one's love of country. I reject that notion. I reject that notion. And here's what I say. I believe there are two definitions of what it means to be a patriot. One is the definition that you condone the conduct of your country, whatever it does. And then there is another, which I believe us all to be, the kind that will fight each and every day for the ideals of our country. And that's what this fight is about. And this fight, then, as we all understand, is about fighting for the ideals of our country, and this is a fight born out of love of country. Knowing what we can be, knowing we are better than this. And so my final point is this. When we look forward and we look at what we imagine our children or our grandchildren might ask us many years from now when they look up at us. And they look up at us and they ask us, where were you at that moment in time? I think what we all know, which is why Impact is having this impact. I think what we all know is when they ask us that question, we don't want our answer to be just what we felt at this moment in time. We want our answer to be what we did at this moment in time. What action we took, what stand we took, what we did with our feet, what we did with our vote, what we did with our voices, what we did with our power, what we did as a collective, and what we did for our country. And so I can't thank everyone here enough for being the leaders that we are, and everyone here is under one roof celebrating who we are with a commitment to get out there and fight for the best of who we are. Thank you.